My fellow citizens, brothers and sisters across our towns and villages, neighbors in cities and hamlets, students in our schools, elders who have seen our history bend and straighten tonight. I speak with a heavy heart and an unbreakable faith in the dignity of our peoples. A foreign strike landed on our soil. It struck not only at a place on a map, but at the fragile trust that binds governments and citizens across our continent. The shock of that explosion traveled faster than any message. It crossed borders, crossing not only miles, but the quiet assumptions that govern international relations. Men and women in capitals far from the blast awakened to a new fact. The old rules that once claimed to protect small states have frayed, and when the powerful reach across the map with bombs, everyone's security is diminished. We gather, therefore, not only to register grief for lives lost and homes shattered, but to declare what shall follow grief, the determined assertion of rights, the disciplined mobilization of solidarity, and the crafting of a response that honors life, defends sovereignty, and insists upon accountability. Let us make one thing immediately plain. Our anger must be principled, our resistance lawful, and our compassion boundless. Anger without discipline descends into chaos. Resistance that violates the law becomes the pretext for further violence. We will not be tempted into mirror reactions that trade one injustice for another. Instead, we will respond with unity, with the tools of politics and law, with mass civic action that demonstrates not only our pain, but our capacity for moral leadership. First, to the families who lost loved ones, to the wounded, to those who will wake to empty places at the table, there is no word that can fix what was taken. But there are actions we can take together to honor memory. We will insist on full, independent investigations with international observers. We will demand reparations where culpability is established, and we will build protections so that humanitarian corridors remain open, medical aid reaches the injured, and communities are rebuilt with dignity. Let aid flow unimpeded. Let hospital beds be filled, not held hostage to geopolitics. Let ambulances move without checkpoints. And let every doctor be allowed to do the solemn work he or she was trained to do. Second, to those who would use sorrow as an instrument of hatred, do not let the language of vengeance guide us. Violence becomes its own kind of tyranny and gives the powerful an excuse to double down. We will mobilize mass movements that are strategic, nonviolent, and persuasive. History teaches us that large, peaceful demonstrations, organized, disciplined, and persistent, can shift the calculus of even the most entrenched power. We will march with banners and petitions. We will sit in across plazas. We will use judicial petitions and international fora. We will lodge cases at regional human rights courts, ask working groups at international institutions to open inquiries, and push for emergency sessions of multilateral bodies. Let our cry be for the application of law, not for the multiplication of arms. Third, this moment is a continental emergency that calls for continental solidarity. Borders drawn by distant hands cannot be a barrier to moral response. We ask our neighbors to stand not out of factional politics, but out of principle. Stand for the norm that civilians are off limits. Stand for the norm that disputes are resolved through diplomacy and law. Stand for the right of nations to chart their own destinies without the gun at the gate. We call upon regional bodies, economic communities, and continental unions to convene emergency sessions. Let ministers of foreign affairs, justice, and defense speak in coordination. Let us agree on common, measured steps, joint investigations, coordinated demands for accountability, temporary diplomatic measures calibrated to preserve lives and channels of negotiation, and the activation of humanitarian mechanisms that transcend bilateral antagonism. Fourth, we must not conflate legitimate security concerns with impunity. If a foreign actor asserts that it struck to prevent a threat, we urge that claim be examined in open forums with evidence and independent scrutiny. Transparency is not a favor reserved for powerful capitals, it is a right for our people. We will ask for, and where necessary, insist upon evidence presented to impartial bodies that can weigh claims without fear or favor. The presumption of innocence is not for the weak alone. It is what keeps the law from becoming the instrument of might. Fifth, our domestic institutions must rise to the occasion. The moment demands that parliaments meet in extraordinary sittings, that courts be supported to examine legal avenues, and that oversight bodies be empowered to audit decisions that affect national security. A robust, lawful response enhances legitimacy at home and credibility abroad. Let us strengthen civil defense not to prepare for war but to ameliorate harm. Evacuation plans, trauma counseling, stockpiles of medical supplies, mobile clinics, and rapid housing support for those displaced. Let our social services be the measure of our civilization. Sixth, the economy must be shielded from panic and predation. Markets react to fear. We will stabilize our currency through transparent interventions, protect the food supply chain, and ensure no speculative hoarding drives prices beyond reach. Small traders, market women and farmers, whose livelihoods are most fragile, must be assured through targeted support, temporary cash transfers, guarantees for transport, and prioritized access to essential supplies. We will not allow geopolitical shocks to be converted into private profit at public expense. Seventh, we will take measured diplomatic steps that hold the line without closing the door. Diplomacy is not only the language of elites, it is the architecture of peace when it is done honestly. We will recall envoys for consultations where necessary. We will demand explanations at the highest levels. We will open channels for negotiation, and we will in parallel work with neutral mediators who can ease tensions while our people heal. The purpose of such diplomacy is not compromise of sovereignty, but the restoration of conditions in which dialogue can be meaningful. Eighth, international law must be our shield and sword. We will bring grievances to regional courts and to international bodies. We will work with human rights organizations to document abuses. We will partner with neutral states and legal experts to craft cases that can be heard and adjudicated. When force is used without clear legal justification, the perpetrators must face the consequences. The path to accountability is long and often uncertain, but moral courage requires that we begin it without delay and with full documentation. Ninth, civil society and the press are central to our response. Independent media outlets must be protected so facts can surface unfiltered, and civil society groups must be supported to provide aid and to monitor actions. We are stronger when reports can be verified and when communities can raise grievances without fear. Let us fund legal clinics to help those wronged access justice, support human rights defenders who document violations, and protect journalists who risk much to tell the public what has happened. 10th, let us think strategically about sanctions and economic measures. Sanctions are blunt instruments. Poorly targeted sanctions punish populations rather than decision makers. We will work with regional partners to craft targeted measures that pressure the actors responsible without amplifying suffering among ordinary people. Asset freezes on responsible officials, travel bans, and trade measures, carefully vetted by multilateral institutions, can be effective when used in a coalition and when paired with humanitarian protections. 11th, the moral high ground must be occupied every day. When we refuse to inflame, when we insist on truth, and when we respond with compassion for all victims, we accumulate moral authority. That authority will bring nations to our side and make it harder for the strike's backers to normalize violence as policy. Let us invite international truth commissions and independent observers to document events. Let us host scholars, diplomats, and religious leaders who can mediate and testify to the world the reality we live. 12th, we must confront the longer-term causes that make our region vulnerable. Insecurity is rarely the product of a single event. It is usually the result of chronic underinvestment, marginalization, and lack of inclusive governance. We will redouble efforts to build resilient institutions, accountable security forces, local development projects that lift marginal communities out of poverty, education that gives youth options beyond armed life, and economic policies that create jobs where desperation might otherwise take root. Strength at home reduces the pretext for outside intervention. 13th, the diaspora and international friends can be mobilized for support. They can amplify our case, provide humanitarian assistance, and lobby their governments to act responsibly. We ask them to use their voices, not to escalate, but to clarify, not to inflame, but to inform. They are bridges between our communities and the world. Let them be instruments of peace. 14th, we must protect the most vulnerable among us, children, the elderly, refugees, and minority communities. When violence or strikes displace people, women and children suffer disproportionately. We will prioritize safe shelters, psychological support, food security, and education continuity for displaced children. We will ensure that stateless persons and migrants are not scapegoated or denied aid. Humanity is the sole currency that buys back trust. 15th, let us be candid about risks. A prolonged confrontation can destabilize the region, invite opportunistic actors, and fracture solidarity. We will therefore craft a response that is calibrated, enough pressure to force accountability, enough openness to keep channels for negotiation, and enough care to prevent the spread of conflict. We will seek multi-layered engagement, legal, diplomatic, civic, and humanitarian, because no single tool will suffice. 16th, culture and faith will be resources, not mere rhetoric. Our poets, musicians, and religious leaders can remind us of the bonds that make us human and prevent the descent into cycles of revenge. Public ceremonies of remembrance must elevate victims without feeding the machinery of hatred. Ritual, when combined with justice, heals. 17th, education is a long-term defense against destabilization. Curriculum that teaches nonviolence, civic responsibility, critical thinking, and human rights awareness will inoculate future generations against simplistic responses. Let the story we teach be one of resilience, law, and active citizenship. 18th, technology and transparency can be leveraged. Digital platforms will document aid flows, map displacement, and provide early warning to reduce harm. Social media must be used responsibly. Viral anger can be useful to mobilize aid, but can also spread falsehoods and inflame tensions. We will promote verified information, support fact-checking initiatives, and counter misinformation that seeks to turn grief into hatred. 19th, the path ahead requires courage and patience. Expediency tempts us toward quick theatrical maneuvers, but lasting peace requires sustained work. Rebuilding institutions, reforming security sectors, and nurturing economic resilience. We will choose the long game, because the short spectacle that sacrifices the public good will not serve the generations to come. Finally, let this be a moment of moral clarity. We are not a passive collection of territories waiting on the decisions of distant capitals. We are communities with memory, with law, and with an enduring will to protect one another. Our response will be rooted in justice, guided by law, and animated by humanity. We will stand together with our neighbors, appeal to the conscience of the world, and build the systems that make such strikes impossible in the future. May our sorrow deepen our resolve to protect life. May our anger sharpen into principled action. May our unity be both our shield and our sermon. And may the children who watch us now inherit a continent stronger in its institutions, richer in its compassion, and safer in its horizons. We will labor, we will litigate, we will march, and we will care until justice, in its patient and relentless way, is done. Defense of sovereignty and justice. The strike is not just an attack on one nation, but on Africa's right to self-determination, and the response must be rooted in law, justice, and sovereignty. Continental solidarity. The event sparks a united African front, demanding accountability and ensuring that no nation on the continent stands alone against foreign aggression. Nonviolent but powerful resistance. Instead of retaliation through chaos, the movement embraces mass mobilization, peaceful protests, and legal challenges to gain moral and political strength. Protection of civilians and economy. Immediate measures are taken to safeguard vulnerable communities, stabilize markets, and provide humanitarian support so ordinary people do not pay the price of geopolitical conflicts. Long-term transformation. Beyond the immediate crisis, Africa strengthens its institutions, builds resilience, invests in local development, and creates systems that prevent future external domination. Do you want me to expand each of these 5 points into 400-word speech segments like we did for the previous topics? My friends, the defense of sovereignty and the pursuit of justice are not luxuries reserved for times of calm. They are obligations we must fulfill the moment our borders, our people, or our laws are violated. Sovereignty means that a nation's destiny is decided by its people and institutions, not by the whims of distant capitals. Justice means that when harm is done, whether by accident, negligence, or deliberate action, there are processes that investigate, adjudicate, and where appropriate, redress. Together they form the moral and legal spine of a free people. Defending sovereignty begins with clear principles. No outside actor may treat our soil as a testing ground for policies absent our consent. When actions occur on our territory that kill civilians, destroy homes, or undermine authority, we must insist on answers that are transparent, verifiable, and immediate. That insistence is not hostility, it is the exercise of the most basic right of any state to seek explanation and accountability. We will not accept vague assurances, we demand evidence, independent inquiry, and remedies that repair harm. Justice requires institutions that are capable and resolute. Courts, parliaments, independent regulators, and oversight bodies must be empowered to examine facts and to take action consistent with domestic and international law. International law is not an abstract classroom exercise. It is a tool we will wield. Regional courts, treaty bodies, and multilateral forums exist precisely to adjudicate cross-border harm. We will use every lawful channel available to seek truth and redress, because legal processes anchor our moral claims in a framework the world recognizes. Yet defense of sovereignty is not merely external posture, it is also internal reform. A sovereign state earns respect when its governance is transparent, its security is professional, and its economy serves the many, strengthening our institutions, police trained to protect, courts that are independent, procurement systems that are clean, reduces pretext for outside intervention, and fortifies our claim to self-determination. The call for justice must be principled and impartial. We condemn wrongdoing wherever it comes from and insist that no actor be above scrutiny. Victims deserve investigations led by credible, neutral experts with access to forensic evidence, witness protection, and legal counsel. Reparations, where justified, must be timely and meaningful. Medical care, compensation, rebuilding, and guarantees of non-repetition. Finally, defending sovereignty and pursuing justice are acts of solidarity with our people. They reassure families that their losses matter, that the state is acting not as a theater of rhetoric, but as an instrument of protection. They send a message to the world: we will engage, we will litigate, and above all, we will insist that power without accountability is unacceptable. In that insistence lies both our dignity and our future. Thought for a couple of seconds. My friends, when one of our nations is struck, the wound is felt in every town and every home across the continent. Continental solidarity is not a slogan, it is the practical muscle that turns grief into mutual protection and outrage into constructive pressure. Solidarity means we do not stand alone. It means our neighbors answer with medicine, investigators, lawyers, and diplomacy. It means our regional bodies convene, our voices are united, and our policies are coordinated, so that a single act of violence does not become a permissive precedent. Solidarity begins with immediate humanitarian response. Neighboring states should open borders to medical teams, trauma counselors, and relief supplies without bureaucratic delay. Airlifts and convoys must be coordinated so hospitals are supported, families receive shelter, and children are protected. A shared logistics plan pooling ambulances, mobile clinics, and trauma specialists saves lives faster than waiting for distant promises. When we treat each other as kin, assistance arrives rapidly and dignity is preserved. Second, solidarity is legal and diplomatic unity. Regional organizations must convene emergency sessions, appoint independent investigation teams, and pursue clear, lawful channels for accountability. Joint statements from heads of state and ministers carry weight. Coordinated diplomatic démarches and multilateral referrals make it costly for perpetrators to dodge scrutiny. Collective legal action, regional courts, human rights commissions, and international tribunals turns private grievance into public process. Unity in method and message prevents dilution and amplifies our legitimacy. Third, solidarity is economic stewardship. We must protect vulnerable populations from predatory market reactions, coordinate measures to stabilize food, fuel, and currency markets, create emergency funds to support small traders and market vendors, and ensure humanitarian exemptions if targeted sanctions are used. Regional funds and pooled resources can underwrite immediate support so ordinary people do not pay for geopolitical storms. Fourth, solidarity builds security cooperation, but within norms of law. Intelligence and information sharing about cross-border threats, humanitarian corridors, and the protection of civilians increases resilience. Joint early warning systems, combined search and rescue capacity, and cooperative border management reduce panic and limit exploitation by spoilers. Security cooperation must be transparent and subject to civilian oversight to prevent abuses. Fifth, solidarity is cultural and moral. Artists, faith leaders, scholars, and the diaspora amplify truth, condemn violence, and mobilize compassion. Pan-African media explains events clearly and resists misinformation. Educational exchanges and regional commemorations keep memory alive while building bonds that outlast crises. Finally, solidarity is forward-looking. We must invest in regional institutions, strong courts, rapid response humanitarian units, and shared research on conflict causes, so that when crises arise, we respond with systems, not improvisation. Solidarity transforms immediate pain into durable cooperation, ensuring that when one of us is harmed, all of us are mobilized to heal, to hold accountable, and to prevent recurrence. In that united stance lies our strength. My friends, resistance need not be loud to be lethal to injustice. Nonviolent action is a weapon of discipline and imagination, a way for ordinary people to disrupt unjust power without becoming what they oppose. When we refuse to answer violence with violence, we expose the moral bankruptcy of the aggressor and marshal the widest possible coalition of sympathizers, neighbors, workers, students, faith communities, and the international conscience. Nonviolence is not passive, it is tactical, strategic, and profoundly powerful. First, plan with precision. Mass movements that change policy are not accidental gatherings. They are organized campaigns with clear objectives, timelines, and tactics. Define targets, not abstract enemies, but specific policies, officials, or practices to be changed, and map the levers of influence, supply chains, logistical nodes, legal venues, and public opinion. Use petitions, coordinated strikes, boycotts, and sit-ins to impose costs on decision makers while minimizing harm to civilians. Each tactic must be chosen for its likely impact and its adherence to nonviolent discipline. Second, build broad coalitions. The strength of nonviolent resistance is its capacity to include workers from varied sectors, market women, students, teachers, religious leaders, civil society groups, and ethical businesses. When a strike or boycott reaches networks across cities and regions, it becomes harder to dismiss. Train leaders in de-escalation and nonviolent discipline so that actions remain peaceful even under pressure. Inclusion expands legitimacy and signals that the movement is about public good, not factional gain. Third, use information and narrative. Document abuses carefully and share verifiable evidence widely. Human stories move hearts, data moves institutions. Use social media responsibly to amplify facts, coordinate logistics, and counter misinformation. Open channels with independent journalists and international observers to keep scrutiny constant. A movement that controls the narrative forces the powerful to answer not only to force, but to truth. Fourth, harness economic leverage. Well-targeted strikes, selective boycotts, and the withdrawal of labor can be decisive. Encourage ethical suppliers and international partners to respect human rights criteria. When commerce aligns with principle, the pressure on decision-makers becomes both moral and material. Fifth, pair protest with legal strategy and constructive alternatives. File suits, bring cases to regional bodies, and present feasible policy alternatives so that resistance is seen as responsible governance, not mere grievance. Offer transitional proposals, oversight mechanisms, inquiry commissions, and reparations plans that make it easier for authorities to choose reform. Finally, sustain the movement with care, protect participants, provide legal aid, plan for fatigue, and rotate responsibilities so leaders do not burn out. Celebrate small victories, they keep morale high. Nonviolent resistance is patient courage. It wins when it outlasts coercion and when it keeps the moral high ground until justice bows to pressure. When disciplined, inclusive, and creative, nonviolent action does more than protest. It rewrites political possibilities, secures accountability, and builds a more just civic order for everyone. Let us choose that path of courage and restraint. My friends, in times of crisis, the first duty of a government is to protect lives and livelihoods, to keep hospitals functioning, markets open, and families fed. Protecting civilians and stabilizing the economy are not separate acts. They are two sides of the same responsibility. A wounded economy deepens human suffering, and civilian harm sows instability that wrecks commerce. Therefore, our response must be immediate, comprehensive, and rooted in compassion and competence. First, shore up emergency humanitarian care. Mobile clinics, trauma units, and emergency supplies must be deployed rapidly to affected areas. Prioritize life-saving medicine, clean water, and shelter. Ensure that ambulances and relief convoys can move freely without bureaucratic delay. Coordinate with NGOs, faith groups, and neighborhood committees so relief is distributed equitably and fast. Train volunteers for triage, psychosocial support, and tracking displaced families so reunification is swift. Second, protect food security and essential supplies. Monitor markets closely for price spikes and hoarding, release strategic reserves where needed, and subsidize staple foods for the most vulnerable households. Work with traders and transporters to keep supply lines open, waive transit fees temporarily, and clear customs bottlenecks for humanitarian cargo. Encourage community kitchens and targeted cash transfers so households can meet immediate needs without selling productive assets. Third, secure incomes. Support small businesses and informal workers with emergency cash grants, access to short-term credit, and tax relief where appropriate. Stabilize wages in critical public services, health, water, sanitation, to ensure continuity. Protect jobs by negotiating temporary work-sharing schemes rather than mass layoffs, and provide vocational support for those whose livelihoods were disrupted so they can re-enter the market quickly. Fourth, safeguard financial stability. Calibrate monetary and fiscal measures to prevent panic-induced currency collapse or banking runs. Establish temporary liquidity facilities for small lenders and reassure depositors through public guarantees for insured accounts. Transparency in interventions builds confidence. Publish the rationale and duration of emergency measures so markets can adjust rationally rather than react in fear. Fifth, protect infrastructure. Prioritize rapid repairs to power lines, water systems, roads, and telecoms so services resume quickly. Mobilize public works teams and pre-position spare parts in regional hubs. Public-private partnerships can speed repairs when properly overseen and audited. Sixth, uphold rule of law and human rights. Protect civilians from exploitation, looting, and opportunistic violence. Ensure security operations distinguish combatants from civilians and prioritize de-escalation. Provide legal aid to those displaced or dispossessed and maintain independent oversight of security forces to prevent abuses. Finally, communicate clearly and often. Honest, regular updates reduce rumor, calm markets, and help households plan. Publish hotlines, relief maps, and resource guides. When people know what to expect and where to find help, panic recedes and cooperation grows. Protecting civilians and the economy is a moral and practical imperative. In meeting it, we preserve life, dignity, and the foundations of recovery. Let us act with speed, fairness, and transparency so that suffering is minimized and resilience, economic and human, is strengthened for the days ahead.